This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India beginning its term as non-permanent member of United Nations Security Council. The participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
India has begun its 2-year tenure as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council starting 1st of January. India will sit in the 15th nation UNSC for the 2021-22 term as a non-permanent member, and this is the 8th time that India has had a seat on this powerful table. Ambassador Sajjanhar, how significant do you think is this tenure that India has as a non-permanent member? And what are the things that India can hope to achieve during its tenure?
Simran, India has been a founding member of the United Nations. So it has contributed, it has proactively worked towards achieving the goals and the objectives of the United Nations. Its presence of the UN Security Council, which is basically mandated to preserve and promote the stability, security, peace in the world, is going to be extremely significant and extremely critical. The reason for this is at any time it would be important, it would be very vital. But particularly when we talk of the time today, there is a huge churning that is taking place in the world today. We see that the center of power, of global authority, of dominance, which used to happen in the transatlantic region, United States, Europe, it has surely shifted to the Indo-Pacific region, to Asia, to the western coast of Pacific, and this particular region. So this is a big churning that has taken place. The second is that China has become very aggressive and very domineering. So this is another change that the world has to come to terms with. And lastly, we have seen that the United States is withdrawing. That, of course, could see a change when President Biden takes over on the 20th of January. And in that context, multilateralism has been hit very badly. We have seen it ourselves earlier in 2020 when we had the COVID-19 pandemic raging through the world. Multilateral institutions, and particularly the United Nations, was really not able to deal with it. So that is how to bring multilateralism in the front and center of this stage. That is going to be very important, and India is going to be working towards that. In addition to this reformed multilateralism, as it is called, and the primary objective of India during this tenure would be the achievement of what is called norms, which is a new orientation for a reformed multilateral system. So the reform of the multilateral system is extremely important, whether it is the UN Security Council, or it is WHO, or it is WTO, or the other agencies. You would recall that when Prime Minister Modi was addressing the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations, and in other fora also, he had mentioned that the United Nations today is in grave crisis. It is in danger. And because it is really not able to deal with the challenges of today, since it is working on the basis of structures that were established 75 years ago. So reform of multilateralism. Second, I would say, would be terrorism. Terrorism is an extremely important aspect. It is a critical threat to international peace and security. There are linkages across borders, across regions and continents in terms of recruitment, in terms of financing and operations. And India, as the listeners would know, had proposed comprehensive convention on international terrorism way back in 1996. So this is again an issue that India is going to be focusing on. Then, of course, bringing human being at the center of development, at the center of technology, and making all development human-centric, bringing the benefits to the people. I think those are issues that India is going to be focusing on and working on.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, as you talked about China and the fact that the world today is witnessing a very aggressive China, and India has seen how aggressive China can be when we see the conflict and China's very aggressive behavior across our borders. How do you feel India and the rest of the world can deal with China when it comes to an organization like the United Nations?
whether it is at the bilateral level or at plurilateral level or even at the multilateral level in the United Nations or the United Nations Security Council. No single country or a group of countries can really take on China, so to say. In the UNSC, it's a permanent member, it has a veto. So these are the problems. So if India were to think that it would be able to take on China singly or with one or two other countries, that would not be possible. I think what we really need to do is we need to ensure that the rule of law is followed. And I think on that basis, we will be able to get a large number of countries together. How China uses its veto, not only for itself, but also to help some of its partners, like we have seen in the case of Pakistan when it was the issue of Masood Azhar, designating him as a terrorist. Then we saw that from 2009 onwards, China kept on either putting a technical hold on this issue or utilizing its veto so that Masood Azhar would not be designated as an international terrorist. And we know that it was doing that basically to help out Pakistan. The whole world knew that Masood Azhar and his organization Jamaat-ud-Dawa, that had been identified as a terrorist organization as long back as 2002. But then China wanted to ensure that Pakistan would not lose face. But then we saw that after India had moved the designation and did not yield any positive result, then we had countries like the United States, like United Kingdom, like France. They applied pressure on China saying that either you come out with the reasons why you are putting this veto, or we will take it to the full UN Security Council, not only in the 1267 committee. So I think India will need to work with other countries to ensure that rule of law is protected and promoted. And India, of course, during this period of COVID also, notwithstanding the fact that we have had problems with multilateralism and the UN Security Council, was really missing in action when it was required the most. You would recall that in March of last year, 2020, coronavirus was raging. At its worst was the world in the month of March. But not even a meeting of the UN Security Council could be organized because China was the president of the UN Security Council, and it took the plea that it was a health problem and it was not a peace and security problem. So no meeting in March, but it took place in April. And there also it could not result in anything significant or meaningful because there was fighting and bickering between the United States and China. Now the new administration that is coming in the United States, that will be strengthening and cementing the alliances. And India will need to work, and India has very good track record. Its voice of moderation, it is a proponent of international law, it is an advocate of dialogue. So I think with all these attributes, we should be able to get number of countries together, whether in the UNSC or in other plurilateral fora, so that we ensure that international law is respected and taken forward.
Ambassador Sajjanal, we also see that the work that India plans to do in the UN Security Council, it will be guided by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's call for a reformed multilateralism and the dynamic 5S vision for foreign policy, namely Samman, that is respect, Samvad, dialogue, Sahyog, cooperation, and Shanti, peace, to create conditions for universal prosperity, Samriddhi. Do you feel, Master Sajjanal, that when we take this approach and we move towards a new orientation for a reformed multilateral system, India can actually push for reforms in the UNSC, which have kind of not really been happening on the ground for a long time? We have been reading and talking about it, but do you think it is now possible to provide it an additional thrust?
I think definitely India will try to give it an additional thrust, because we know that there is a wide measure of support and there is a huge mass of number of countries in the United Nations. I think out of 193 countries, a preponderant number is in favor of an expansion of the UN Security Council and other reforms in the functioning of the United Nations, like the UN General Assembly, the role of the UN Secretary General, etc. So there is a growing body of voice which is supporting this. But we know that there are certain vested interests which do not want any change whatsoever in this. So I think we will have to work together with the countries. we have been asking for a text-based negotiation, but we have known that basically it is China which has been standing in the way of these text-based negotiations. Today we can see that there is a huge pushback against China. We can see that the world over, in terms of the reputation loss, China has suffered greatly. It might not have suffered very much in terms of its economic or political or military prowess or its bilateral relations. But in terms of its reputation, that it is emerged as a bully, that it is muscle flexing and being very, very aggressive and not respecting international law. So I think that is the sort of image that now we have of China. So I think if India is able to work with other countries, get text-based negotiations, because otherwise the danger there is, Simran, that the United Nations will get increasingly marginalized and become irrelevant. You would recall that last year in August 2020, President Trump had invited Prime Minister Modi because he was to host the G7. And he had said that in addition to the permanent G7 members, he would invite India, Australia and South Korea and expand it to G10. This time, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has invited the leaders of these three countries. So I think there are going to be other plurilateral bodies which will come and which will start playing a very important role of ensuring peace and security in the world if the United Nations is not able to fulfill its responsibilities. So if we have a G10 emerging, which is invested with this idea of ensuring peace and security, or that gets transformed into a D10, 10 major democracies of the world. So I think that will be further lessening the significance of the United Nations. So if the United Nations has to continue to be relevant and significant and fulfill its mandate and its objective, it will really have to come to terms with the realities of today and change itself, transform itself accordingly.
Ambassador Sachinaar, as you also talked about the fact that the UN has to become the primary body which takes on the issue of international terrorism and how to deal with it. And this is something that India has been raising at various international forums, including the UN. In 2011-2012, when India had chaired the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Committee and had also introduced the concept of zero tolerance for terrorism. Do you feel that this tenure provides India also to push the world towards a better, greater understanding of what terrorism is doing to harm the world, and also to push home the fact that the countries which are using terrorism as a state policy need to be reined in? Again, I think the problem might there be China, which is supporting Pakistan. So how does one go about this entire process?
I think basically, again, trying to build a group of like-minded countries which are on the same page. And I think that as far as Europe is concerned, we have seen what has happened in France recently. We have seen what has happened in Belgium. We've seen what has happened in Austria, in Germany. So I think many of these countries would be on the same page as far as dealing with terrorism is concerned, that not only the sponsors, the groups that are organizing, that are behind these terrorist bodies, all of them need to be reined in, the money laundering, the terror financing. So I think if we are able to get all of them together, and then there can be a pushback. And even as far as the instrument of the Financial Action Task Force and what its objective, what its role and its responsibilities are, I think if we can work together on that, bring a larger measure of countries, because the scourge of terrorism today is expanding, and now it is not only an India-specific or South Asia region-specific issue, it's a global issue. So India will definitely try to work with other like-minded countries, and I am hopeful that we will be able to make progress in this field.
With this, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India beginning its term as non-permanent member of United Nations Security Council. The participants were Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our website newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.